Aloha and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us here today for our webinar, Managing Crisis on Multiple Fronts, Southeast Asian Women's Leadership During COVID-19, held with support from U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Office of Women, Peace, and Security. My name is Rob York, and I am Director for Regional Affairs at Pacific Forum, a Honolulu-based research institute focused on defense and security policy in the Indo-Pacific. We are joined by colleagues from U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. This webinar will explore unique challenges faced by women in Southeast Asia who are at the front lines of advancing peace and stability in the region during multiple forms of crisis, from COVID-19 to conflicts and climate change. According to a 2020 collaborative UN Women in ASEAN report, COVID-19 has affected multiple aspects of life in ASEAN member states, threatening to halt or decelerate the progress achieved in previous years across social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. Within Southeast Asia, the pandemic has intersected with protracted conflicts, renewed political crises, and mass displacement due to a range of environmental disasters. Such accumulated insecurities mean for millions of people, especially women and girls, risk of sexual and gender-based violence, health decline, and intergenerational poverty, among many other harms. There are immediate security concerns that the simultaneous crises we are witnessing in Southeast Asia are reversing gains that may have already been made to promote peace and development in the region. Over the next 90 minutes, this panel, made up of regional experts from Australia, Timor-Leste, the Philippines, and Myanmar, will examine how women navigate these often compounding crises in their daily lives and outline windows of opportunity for women's activism in addressing insecurity. Through this examination, these experts will highlight the importance of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda in promoting human rights and gender equality. The panel will also consider how lessons from the current COVID-19 crisis might inform long-term resilience and durable peace across Southeast Asia. Finally, panelists will provide recommendations of how to strengthen peace-building processes and institutions to ensure women's full, equal, and meaningful participation, and how international and regional communities might better support the work of women and women's organizations in Southeast Asia. Also note that remarks made in today's program are on the record, and a video and audio recording of this session will be made available on the Pacific Forum website and on Indo-PACOM's and Pacific Forum's YouTube channel in the future. We'll also have a post-event survey we'd like you to complete after the event ends. The discussion, which will include feedback and Q&A from the audience, will be moderated by Dr. Maria Tanyag, Resident WPS Fellow at Pacific Forum and Research Fellow and Lecturer at Australian National University. Before Dr. Tanyag takes the floor, I want to virtually pass the mic to Ms. Sharon Feist for welcoming remarks on behalf of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Office of Women, Peace, and Security. Ms. Feist is the first gender advisor to the Commander, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, serving as the principal advisor on women, peace, and security within the Indo-Pacific. Ms. Feist, over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rob. And the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's J9 Office of Women, Peace, and Security is delighted to sponsor this webinar and co-partner with Pacific Forum on a range of critical women, peace, and security related topics this past year. We are grateful for our partnership. And today's webinar is no exception. But first and foremost, I'd like to take a moment to honor the distinguished women on this panel, Dr. Maria Tanyag, Dr. Mimi Bird, Dr. Melissa Johnston, Ms. Fatima Piratila Alian, and Ms. Carmeneza dos Santos Montero, for your leadership, your courage, and for exercising your power to transform this world for better. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. And I'd also like to take a moment to honor all the women before us who have stood at the front lines of crisis, whether in this region or in others, those who are visible and those whose stories were never written into history. Their lives have paved the way for us today, including being able to hold opportunities like this webinar. So it's now my pleasure to turn this over to Dr. Maria Tanyag, our moderator for the remainder of this program. Dr. Tanyag is a lecturer at the IR Department, Cora Bell School of Asia Pacific Affairs, Australian National University, and a resident Women, Peace, and Security Fellow at Pacific Forum. Her research agenda broadly seeks to understand gendered insecurities and transformations in a global context of multiple intersecting crises, from COVID-19 to climate change. And her most recent publications are Sexual Health and World Peace and the Routledge Handbook of Feminist Peace Research, A Feminist Call to be Radical, Linking Women's Health and Planetary Health, in the journal Politics and Gender, and the essay How the Feminist Research Will Help Solve the Climate Crisis. In 2020, Dr. Tanyag is one of the contributing authors to the Global Report on Gender, Climate, and Security, Sustaining Inclusive Peace on the Front Lines of Climate Change, published by the United Nations EP, UN Women, UNDPPA, and UNDP. So over to you, Dr. Tanyag, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sharon and Rob, for the warm introductions. And it's indeed a great pleasure to be moderating this esteemed panel. And I just want to say, which I imagine I'll say a lot today, how very grateful and privileged we are that we have our speakers today. Let me begin by introducing our speakers. First, we have Dr. Mimi Winbird, who is a professor at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. She holds a doctorate in education from the University of Southern California. She researches, publishes, and teaches in the area of US-Myanmar relations, security dynamics of Southeast Asia, linkages between the role of education, economic development, gender, private sector, and security in the Indo-Pacific region. Dr. Bird has served as a Deputy Economic Advisor at U.S. Pacific Command in uniform prior to her position at DKI APCSS. She has also worked in the private sector for 16 years. Dr. Bird is an adjunct fellow at the East-West Center in Honolulu and currently serves on the boards of the Keck Center for International and Strategic Studies at Claremont McKenna College in California and Women's Lead in Myanmar. Our other speaker, Ms. Fatima Pirtila Alian, is the program manager of Nisa Ol Hakfi Bangsamoro, or Women for Justice in the Bangsamoro, an organization that provides a venue for Bangsamoro women to progressively interpret Islamic teachings on gender, women's rights, and peace and development issues. Fatima holds a master's degree in religion and public life from Leeds University, UK. She was a Ford Foundation Fellow and has specialized training and fellowships on gender, Islam, peace and conflict in Indonesia and India. She has worked as a researcher and consultant for UNDP, UN Women, and CARE Philippines, among many others, and has been directly involved as a facilitator in the Transitional Justice and Reconciliation Commission in the Philippines. Ms. Carmeneza dos Santos Montero, who will be joining us later from Timor-Leste, has earned her Bachelor of Arts in International Relations from the Australian National University with honors. Carmen is currently working as sector lead under the Ministry of Social Solidarity and Inclusion in Timor-Leste. Previously, she worked as Director for Policy and Institutional Strengthening of the Asia Foundation and for various national and international organizations, both in Timor-Leste and Australia. She has also worked as a senior officer for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia. Among her many achievements is the recipient of the Australian Day Achievements Awards and for outstanding initiative and commitment to coordinating a humanitarian response in Timor-Leste in 2016. And last, we are joined by Dr. Melissa Johnston, a lecturer at the University of Melbourne. Melissa's work applies a gender lens to examine the links between security and political economy of development in order to better understand women's and men's experiences in conflict-affected environments. She is the recipient of the 2019 Australian Political Studies Association Best Thesis Prize and a Prime Minister's Endeavour Award for her work undertaken in Indonesia and Timor-Leste. She has also conducted extensive field work in Myanmar, Timor-Leste, and Indonesia, as well as projects on violent extremism in Libya, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Melissa's academic work is informed by her experience working at the UN Industrial Development Organization and the NGO Women Against Violence in Europe. So as you would be very impressed as I am. We are in the company of people who have direct and grounded knowledge of the questions that we are going to be asking in this webinar. So I'd like to pose the first question. which is really how we understand and how we can look at the impacts of crises now, from COVID-19 to climate change. How are these crises exacerbating gender inequalities and pre-existing security threats in Southeast Asia? And that is a broad question, but please feel free to speak on your specific country expertise or however you want to. I'll start off with Dr. Bird, if that's okay. Dr. Bird, please unmute.
Well, thank you, Maria. Okay, well, I'm going to start with Myanmar because that is currently in crisis. Myanmar is facing, I would say, a triple crisis, right? In addition to COVID, which is COVID infection that is uncontrolled. It's unable to control at all. And then, of course, there's a political crisis that's been followed by security crisis, And out of all that, of course, the women, especially for the political and security crisis, the women are, they have more to lose. Because if the military come back into power, the misogynist the organization will push a lot of the wins the women has made in last 10 years. But so there's a women being victim, but I want to talk about women being the enablers. They are in the right now front line of this resistance. They are unprecedented amount of women involvement in this restoration for democracy against the military coup at this moment. And they were, and this is the result of a lot of international engagement, 8 packages that have women empowerment in it. So not only women now feel like this whole political crisis and security crisis is relevant to them, and they also feel confident and they have capacity and capability to lead. So we're seeing a lot of women in the leadership position, not only participation, which is much higher than previous uprising. They are taking a leadership role. So in this change, maybe the secret weapon or a different, that may get people to the tipping point to defeat the military and restore democracy. And of course, specifically through COVID, so, COVID third wave came in the middle of this whole crisis, political and security crisis, and military has weaponized the COVID. Really, instead of treating them, they use them against the people, and they started arresting a lot of the healthcare workers. And healthcare workers are majority of women, right? And the head of the vaccination program, Dr. Tata Lin, she was arrested and put in jail for treason. In the middle of they're trying to roll out the vaccination, they took her, and according to the UN, they estimated to be like 260 attacks has been done against the healthcare workers, and hundreds has been put in jail because of during the initial when the political crisis started. There were a lot of strikes against the military. They call it civil disobedience movement, CDM. And in that, a lot of the healthcare workers led the way. Well, as soon as you say healthcare workers, a lot of them are women, right? So, that's how it rolls. So when when the third wave hits, the women, despite the risk of arrest, they started helping people out. And as they were running these underground clinics to treat the people, many of them were arrested. So here, women as a victim, as well as women are the, provider of security, provider of on the resistance side. And that is directly, we can relate that their ability to resist go back to all these women peace and security programs, all the 8 packages that had women empowerment. That is what holding the front line of democracy in Myanmar, the women. So
Thank you, Dr. Bird. We can now go to Mel. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Mel.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. I think probably what I'd contend is a bit of a more macro observation about the links between crisis and insecurity, and women's insecurity in particular. I think what we see in the current moment, and it's up for debate, and I'd love to hear anybody else's opinions on it, is actually a patriarchal reset at global level. The gains that we've made in everyday women's empowerment across the world face a severe reset to a more gender unequal society. And I make that kind of assertion on two fronts. First, COVID-19 has had a big role in reshaping the gender division of labour back to one where women have less access to paid work, and two, where women have more responsibility inside the home with fewer resources. So I also would contend that the other axis of this patriarchal reset concerns conflict and violence against women. So when we have this gender division of labour, in the first instance, I'm drawing on research that we've done recently that surveyed women, peace and security practitioners in Southeast Asia, and make broad remarks on that. You know, in the first case, there's been a huge loss in productive work for women. That means access to paid work in the productive sphere. Most of the job losses faced globally were jobs that were lost by women, and that lack of access to paid work has really impacted their ability to engage in those patriarchal bargains inside the home. We see then, of course, that in Southeast Asia in particular, losses are more widespread in the informal sector as well, where the majority of women are employed. You know, they make up a huge part of the precarious and informal sector, market vendors, street markets. Certainly we had a lot of people talking about restrictions on street markets really impacting everyday earnings for women. And of course, everyone has noted that COVID crisis means that we have an increase in labour burdens inside the social reproductive sphere. So these greater work burdens are noticed in a large way because children are at home, men are at home, there's more work to do overall. And we also note the role that education plays in actually helping mitigate some of those social reproductive burdens, because kids are taken care of by the state for a certain amount of the day. And when you have kids not in school, that means that all of that educational work and care work has to be done for them at home. I think that the second point I'd make around insecurity is that we know from big studies of gender insecurity that the more intense the inequality in the gender division of labour, the more likely war is. We actually have good evidence to say that states with only 10% of women in the labour force are nearly 30 times more likely to go to war than other kinds of states holding all other variables equal. So I think that when we're talking about the gender division of labour in that security space, this might seem like small kind of discussions and something quite different from military, but think about what the structure of society and the structure of that labour means for general peace. So patriarchal reset is not only a problem for women's rights, but also for peace overall. In the final 20 seconds, I'd make the point that in terms of violence against women, all of our practitioners in the research noted a big upswell in demand for resources for violence against women. They were facing more violence at home because men were in the home more often, right? Because it's men's violence against women that's the problem. And I would only note, and we don't know long-term trends and data for this, that one of the key risk factors for violence further down the line, both violence against women and public violence, so violence of men on other men, is a big risk factor for that is having experienced abuse in the home as a child. So if we have this big upswell of violence in the home, that's also setting a precondition for further conflict. And that's my intervention there on crisis.
Thank you very much, Mel. I will now turn to Carmen. Carmen?
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you, Melissa, and the other for sharing. I think I will just start with the experience from Timor-Leste and how crisis has deepened inequalities for women and girls in Timor-Leste. I mean, Timor-Leste has been in a political instability for the past 3-4 years before COVID hit. And we had different political parties, a small country with too many political parties, and changing in government very often, which caused into a lack of budget of the state budget, and causing resources issue for government programs, which actually been the biggest investment in the absence of private sector in the country. And then with the COVID hit, as Melissa has mentioned on the macro level, I think it's bringing home most of the issues that women and girls in Timor face, where women are occupied mostly the informal economies in the countries, and with the public health measures by government of a lockdown almost for more than a year now, continuously has caused in lack of opportunity for income generations for women and children, and for women specifically. And then adding to that crisis, in April this year, we had a huge flood, which affect almost majority of the whole countries, and put thousands of people homeless, and taking almost 40 lives. So this situation, I think the crisis situation, that's deepening poverty and inequality for women and girls in Timor. But I think, and it's also not only in the economic front, but it's also in terms of divisions of labors. Women often are the caretaker of the families, be it elderly and the youngers, and so most women were being not only lost their income opportunities, but also being given most of their responsibilities at home, be whether they are working women or women who actually work in the informal sector where they has been affected. I think the memories of resistance and women role in resistance in Timor during the 24 years occupation of Indonesia is really highlight the important role of women in Timor in bringing peace and taking leadership role in a situation in the absence of male. However, in the more in the situation as in the independent era, often women role are pushed back to the kind of traditional role. And I think while we have achieved so much, and we have progressing in ensuring women participation in politics, and ensuring women rights and gender equalities in the society, the patriarchal culture embedded in the society is almost unshakable still, and I think it's require a lot of work at our end to ensure, to kind of bring back the role of women in leadership and also in bringing peace and security to this community. I think I will end at that, and then we'll share more. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. And I now turn to Fatima.
Yes, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. In the Bangsamoro homeland, women are silenced at home, and they also suffer multiple burden, and mental health issue appears to be an issue of concern. In 2020 and 2021, we had series of committee dialogues and focus group discussions. We wanted to reach out to as many women to see how the pandemic security threats, when we say security threats, not only the militarized, but also food security and also issues on environment has affected them, coupled with COVID-19. And there were incidences, of course, of unreported, because in the Bangsamoro context, and I'm pretty sure in some Muslim countries, issues on domestic violence is still considered taboo, and therefore it's something private. And the families would often be the one to mediate among family members. But we have seen incidences of domestic violence increased in 2020 at the onset of the pandemic in March of last year, at least in the Philippines. The stress level is heightened among women as they are also both caretakers, and now they also have to look for sources of livelihood for their family, because security in some areas, and we have at the present administration who really has different way of taking care or appreciating security is very highly militarized and highly securitized. Therefore, some men are not able to go and do their farming or do their aqua related livelihoods, and therefore women this time have to take on the cudgel to also take care of the livelihood of their family. On the economic side, that has already been shared by many, but I would just like to highlight on small hotels, for instance, would rather have men employees rather than female employees to be hired, because they say that men are safer in getting public transportation daily, and they can withstand, I do not understand why, but they say that men can withstand virus, meaning pandemic, as compared to women. And because women are seen as frail, fragile, again, it's the patriarchal treatment and the perspective of many of the men. And I think one unique, and that has something, and I think we should really talk about, is the invisibility of the female circumcision practices in the Bangsamoro homeland, or the female genital mutilation, where we are type 4 under that under the WHO type. And why do I say that there's an economic side to this? Because if the community would know that an uncircumcised Bangsamoro women or revert women, meaning those who have embraced Islam, are not circumcised, therefore their whatever goods are produced that they have will not be patronized in the community. So you have security issues, you have COVID, and now women would like to play an important role for the economic side. They cannot, because they are not circumcised, because they do not believe in the circumcision. And of course, we know that circumcision is not part of Islam, at least on the women's side. And so they are not pure, they do not belong to the community, so they are shunned by some of the communities. We're not saying that this is already predominant in the Bangsamoro homeland, but there are very, very few, but we do not know how many barangays or areas do we have. And lastly, I guess I have I think a minute more. In looking at conflict security and DRR, the IDP young women and women are usually sidelined in the design and planning of their welfare during camp management. 2, there is also low appreciation on the importance of a gendered and cultural sensitive contingency, recovery, and rehabilitation planning. Therefore, women are left behind, and some of their needs are not addressed, especially in forgotten crises, such as Sulu, and not only Marawi, but we also have Sulu, we also have Zamboanga City, we also have series of conflicts in Basilan, and also in Maguindanao areas in the Bangsamoro homeland. And lastly, on the security, there have been a lot of mistaken identities. And these are young female students and also young male students who are studying Quran in areas in Sulu and other places in the Bangsamoro homeland, because they are immediately identified they belong to a terrorist group or lawless groups with the ISIS, ISIL, Abu Sayyaf group. And therefore, women specifically are more of a disadvantage because they are harassed. And we know what kind of harassment that is as compared to men. They are harassed, and some of them are being touched by the military, are being asked to remove some of their veils. And for them, that is very important part of their body. And on the DRR, last one is that women we know that are always at home, and yet any trainings or any community meetings they are not part of. Therefore, instead that they become a partner of local government units to save more lives and to have a timely and organized manner, women are not given a chance to participate in any of the DRR meetings. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that rounds our first question. And I think just to recap some of the fascinating insights that our speakers have raised, I think when we ask what are the impacts of the crises, I think a lot of the points that mentioned the importance of labor and women's, in particular, labor at the household and for their communities, that we need to also critically examine which forms of labor are valued, because as we know, a lot of women are already in the health sector and informal economies. They've also powerfully raised the importance of not just looking at the dominant and most pressing crisis, which is the COVID-19 crisis, but actually linking it back to all other forms of insecurities that women are experiencing, including the very militarization of the pandemic response. So I think that leads us to the next question. And I really appreciated the point raised by Carmen in asking, why are these patriarchal structures so difficult to shake, and that they've remained unshakable, basically. And so the next question is, learning what we are seeing now from the COVID-19 crisis, how can we, really shake those patriarchal structures and mindsets, as also Fatima mentioned, into actually promoting women's leadership and participation, but also long-term resilience and durable peace that shakes those patriarchal structures. So I'll start again with Dr. Bird, if that's okay. Yep. You have to unmute.
Well, that's a question, right? That's a whatever $7 million question that we've been trying to figure out. Why is it so hard to, root out this inequality? The women for the women and gender inequality, and I'm going to just use Myanmar as a case study. Here it is a crisis. So what we can do is using this crisis as a, to flip it. This is an opportunity for us. We see that women are stepping up. I just wrote an article for the Indo-Pacific Affairs journal that was published out of Air University in Alabama. I call for, we just need to, this is the time to step up and help them so that we can get over the tipping point for these women, and of course, I think we just need to continue to do what we've been doing. I think that probably we will have up and down over the time, but even if it's up and down, it's still on a upward slope. I think we're making progress, because these are deep-rooted beliefs, right? And then they're also tied to religion, although religion doesn't say that really, if you really peel back all of it, but it's just that organized religion use these religion to, for whatever reason, put women in a disadvantaged place. But as we know from our research, when the society, the gender equality, is there's a better gender equality, the society also is more prosperous. Like Melissa said earlier, even less war, So we just have to continue to make people understand that not just women loses in this, right? Also the entire society lose, when there's not equal opportunities or equality for the women. So that's my take on it.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. To Melissa?
Yeah, I think I probably want to draw on what I said in the beginning about the gender division of labour to talk about windows of opportunity, and also sort of expand maybe a little bit on what Mimi has just discussed there, Dr. Bird has just discussed there, about, how can we enact that radical solidarity. And I think, for me, radical solidarity is definitely at the heart of what is possible in the current crisis. So I'm overall, a bit of a glass half empty kind of scholar, to be quite honest. But if I was going to say what the opportunities are, I'd say that there has been a recognition, although many deny it, during the COVID crisis of how important that gender division of labour is. Because when it's public-private, we can kind of ignore it, but because that we've needed so much more work to be done on all those multiple fronts, and women have been doing it, we see it a bit more now. But I think there are real structural issues when trying to enact that radical solidarity in Southeast Asia. It has particular political trajectories, and a lot of those political trajectories have meant that women from all classes have struck patriarchal bargains of their own within their classes. So I think also part of the question of how to challenge patriarchy is a bit how we challenge authoritarian governments in those powerful groups within Southeast Asia. So for me, we've been able to, and this applies equally in Australia as well, there have been good bargains struck around issues like violence against women, where, we can see the universal impacts of it, and there have been decent bargains struck around, legal reform and equality before the law. But this has been less able to be reached some compromise with gender division of labour. And because in Southeast Asia, there are much stronger class differences between people that have money and people who don't, I think that enacting that radical solidarity across women's groups in Southeast Asia is particularly difficult. So the window of opportunity, as migrant workers have left, as women in Southeast Asia have had to take on more of that burden, even in elite families, there's a possibility for recognition of that work and of demands on the state to support social reproductive labour for all women and not just a few. And that would be my suggestion of a window of opportunity.
Thank you. I can now go to Carmen, if that's okay, Carmen.
Thank you, Maria. I think, in terms of how we can say this, a patriarchal issue, I think it also, from what I observed from my own country, because it's so embedded and the way in which family structures, it's almost like something that people do it without even thinking, and women, for example, even with the gender labor division at home and even in the offices, in the very high level offices, I often see, like, even women minister most of the time, like taking the role whether intuitively to actually look after, like, food for their male friends, and where the males are actually sit around during the break to kind of have conversation with other male. So I think it's perhaps the other windows opportunity is actually also to start with female and how we kind of educate our children, and how we put ourselves, assert ourselves in the public life. I mean, it might be different from other countries, but I feel at times I see women actually even at the high level in the political sphere or in the bureaucracy, they kind of continue to assert this gender divisions, division of role, while I also have seen, like, during the resistance, women actually do take leadership role when in the absence of male, and even bring about changes that often not recognized. And I think perhaps what I can see is that recognizing how women has the both have the capacities and the power to actually bring about changes and kind of build or capitalize on that. That will be my kind of suggestion. Thank you.
Excellent. And over to Fatima.
Thank you. In the Bangsamoro homeland, we have the ongoing peace process between the government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. So I'd like to zone in on that. And there are different activities happening. But I think what is lacking basically are the women's representation and political participation in the peace process itself. For instance, under the normalization component, you have the joint peace and security team between the government and the rebel front. However, the women are invisible. And yet we have a lot of Bangsamoro women who are combatant women or who have very good leadership in the ground and who can definitely do more peace building effectively. And even they mediate actually better as compared to men. Sorry to the gentlemen who are in here, but it's a given fact that there are a lot of very good women mediators. So there is that lack of women representation at the formal peace tables. We have also seen at the informal peace tables certain components or mechanisms led by the CSOs together, of course, with INGOs. For instance, the Insider Mediators Group, the Bangsamoro Insider Mediators Group are women and men who do mediation at the political level, meaning at the formal peace tables. We have women who are part of the peace processes, and we also have women who are doing community work who are at the non-formal or informal peace processes. They have the capacity to engage with men. The MILF are basically a lot of them are men, so that the gendered lens in looking at peace building, in looking at other issues are also in the peace tables. Another one is the community safety working group. These are Bangsamoro women and indigenous women. We have partnered with UN Women in the past 2 or 3 years, and we have seen the indigenous safety mechanisms that are not highly militarized, that proved that security can actually be done locally by women using their own indigenous skills and participation. That has something to be tapped because that is an untapped resource by the government and by the INGOs, and that is something very interesting and exciting to take a look at. At the first track level, if you talk about the formal peace process, negotiated agreements prove more lasting and endurable when women are part of the negotiations, actually, and they are not treated as bargaining points in the discussion. Therefore, parallel to this is ensuring that the peace agreement are implemented, that includes women issues and as part, and they are also implementers. Any implementation will not be successful if women will not be part of it. So again, we are saying that in the current peace process, there needs to be calibration of women's meaningful political participation, both at the formal and the informal peace processes, specifically on the MILF and the GPH. Thank you.
I want to add a little bit to Fatima, right? Because she's showing Bangsamoro, but also in Myanmar side, I was working with a lot of women, trying to get their representation at the table. And many times they said that the men said, you don't know anything about peace process, so you can't be here. Well, I told them to go back and tell them that if they know so much about peace process, why is Myanmar has not been in peace, at war for the last 75 years. So maybe it's time for them to step aside and let the women in. They may have something to offer.
I definitely
right? I mean, if they're working
I
on it, if they
definitely
know so
agree
much
with that
about
one.
security, why isn't there a peace, So just step aside and let the women do it.
I also absolutely agree. And in terms of challenging, really, what has been the modus operandi of these processes for the longest time, and there is, without question, a predominance of male-dominated decision-making processes, and absolutely. So that round of questions, just to recap to our audience, really raised a lot of insights. And I think there's a lot of overlaps that, as Mimi pointed out, between Myanmar, Bangsamoro in Philippines, and Timor-Leste, and that women have always been at the front lines of resistance movements and really taking on leadership. But as our speakers pointed out, we need to truly train our minds to recognize the different forms of leadership skills and modalities that they advance. And in particular, as Fatima mentioned, these still unrecognized and unharnessed or untapped skills around localized, traditional, indigenous ways of building peace, which is very important. And also going back to Mel's point on radical solidarity, and how we, going back to Mimi's point, we might have ups and downs, but as long as we are moving forward and really cutting across different class lines, ethnic lines, religious lines, then we are able to perhaps harness this triple or multiple crises moment that we are experiencing now into something that can actually change business as usual, right? Really transformative outcomes. So this now leads us to a final question so that we have enough time for Q&A. From the audience. I think the next question is really about how can we do better and how can we support, and by we mean international and regional community, existing processes and institutions to actually support the work of women and women's networks or organizations. So what can we tell the international and regional community to actually do exactly as you've said for women's leadership and participation? Should we go in the same order, and we'll start off again with you?
No, I think we should start with this.
Well, I realized that. All right. Yeah. Well, I could then, Fatima, because you've had the last say in the round, but over to you.
Sure. I think what the international and regional community can do better to support women is to open different platforms as a springboard for women empowerment and participation. And also, one thing in the last 15 or 18 years of my life, and I'm pretty sure longer on others, there's really a problem of identifying women from the community. Now, look, this is what I always say. If we want community ownership to happen, let the locals lead. People, women like us who are not from the community, we should actually build bridges and networking for them, but we should not talk about their lives. Their stories we can carry, but we have to bring it back to them. And this is one thing that is lacking. The women who are really from the communities should actually be at the forefront, and women like ourselves should be behind them or beside them. And this is one thing that really I really dream of, that somehow we can have like 20 or 30 women rock stars coming from different communities, and they are the ones really leading, and we provide whatever lens, gender lens that it be, gender in Islam, whatever that is. And I think that's one thing that the international and regional community should be able to support groups like ourselves so that we can organize. For instance, IDP women. Have we seen IDP women who are organized and who claim accountability to their government. I don't see that, at least in our country, because we're pushing for an IDP bill, but the IDP bill should be pushed by the IDPs themselves. And we have seen IDP men pushing it, but where are the IDP women? So we need to build that knowledge block piece, because that's part of peace building, that you need to formulate certain designs together with them. You have to consult them so that their voice and their real needs will be reflected in whatever modalities or proposals that you will be doing. So that needs to be there. Aside from being partnered with them, that they should be at the forefront, we also have to give them all the skills that they need so that they're able to articulate. I think the last is the articulation of the local women is a little bit problematic because they do not speak the language that we speak. You know, the frameworks that UN sometimes and other funding agencies give so much sexiness to words like, I don't know, whatever that is. And sometimes it doesn't reflect the live realities of these women. So I'm like, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Are we doing this to get funds? Are we doing this for the funders? So again, the goal really is, why are you doing what you're doing for the past year? It's not for yourself. It's not your bread and butter, but these are for the women. So participation, building blocks, knowledge and the skills that they need, and then the articulation, we also have to help them out. So that's the top of my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. Carmen?
Thank you, Fatima. I think I really agree with what Fatima has put forward, and in addition to that, I think building on what Fatima say about lack of articulations, I think it's really important because one, in many of the communities that we work, I mean, especially me being Timorese and working with a lot of gender advocates, sometimes the cultural differences and our different upbringing actually do really matters in the way we see the world, and sometimes it make it difficult for women in the local community to really see how it actually really helping them to stand on their feet, to stand on their own feet. So I think in addition to all that Fatima have mentioned, perhaps also identifying and recognizing, identifying the modalities and recognizing the modalities that they have used to navigate their life through crisis and has survived and provide for their families and their community, name them and make them kind of also see that that is actually something that should be recognized by themselves and also by the community, because oftentimes I felt that they kind of forgot the modalities that they use because it's never discussed or it's never highlighted as and recognized, and often those knowledge that they have actually earned through their experiences are disappear in time of peace, and therefore in time of peace their role in the communities are actually diminished somehow. So I felt that building having them participate and let them deal, lead some of this work and help them identify and recognize the modalities to which they have actually survived and lead in the situation of crisis is really important, in addition to what Fatima have mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. We now go to Mel.
Yeah, I really like both Carmen and Fatima's focus on that material reality and the lived experience of people who are living through crises. And that is something that we do forget inside very middle class or upper middle class institutions like universities and international organizations. So I'm going to confine my comments a little bit more to that macro level and critique of what I see as donor prerogatives, actually, in women, peace and security agenda and dealing with crisis more broadly. As I mentioned, I think that, just as women strike patriarchal bargains with men of their class, so too do we sort of strike bargains with capital, with the market. And I think we come at a bit of a decision point for feminists, in that we have a lot of recognition now of our brand, to use a poor phrase. But there's a risk, at least as I see it, with using neoliberal approaches to women's empowerment that really risk undermining solidarity, and of that radical sort that I talked about earlier, but also just the day-to-day functioning of programs. So, for example, when I look, Australia sees itself as a major donor on violence against women and women's empowerment in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia. And yet when I drill down and look at the funding of their programs, a huge amount of it goes to, does anyone want to guess? Anyone want to guess? I bet Maria knows what I'm going to say.
And goes to INGOs and goes to international advisors and stuff. And I did work in one of the NGOs, and I have to resign because I feel so bad that because like 80% of their funding will actually go to salaries of internationals, and there will be like less than 15% goes to the communities. Yeah.
Actually, that's a great point, because I wasn't going to say that, but the private contracting of the aid industry is absolutely underlying a huge problem, Fatima. And like those people that they contract are definitely like private sector employees, and not, usually state employees who are employed at a much lower rate. But in terms of like the operational funding, program funding, most of it goes to microfinance. Really, whatever program we're running in the Pacific or in Southeast Asia, whether it's women's, political empowerment, countering violent extremism, whatever kind of thing we're doing, it's always microfinance. And empirically, what happens with that is the money comes from the Australian taxpayer to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. They then subcontract it to a finance agent, a microfinance investment vehicle, who then invest in all small microfinance across the region. So when we lend it out as a grant, when it goes to the microfinance organisation, it becomes a profit-making mechanism, sometimes up to 120% interest. So actually, we're just paying the middleman with money that should be spent on WPS things. And then we wonder why the programming is ineffective, because it's not going where it's supposed to be going. Like Fatima says, it's going also to private sector contractors, but then operationally is going to fund things that probably don't have much effect on helping people deal with crisis or with security issues.
It was Carmen who...
Carmen, sorry. Sorry, Carmen.
Thank you. Absolutely. And Dr. Bird for the final response.
Yeah, I agree with all. It's a multi-dimensional issue, so we have to have a multi-dimensional solution. I don't think that one thing, microfinance is a good one, but if it is done well, but there are many times, there are a lot of problem with it. So any program, I wanted to say, my personal experience, I was working with a bunch of women from IDP camps, right? And the first, these women are, they had to run because of the conflict, right? Violence conflict between the ethnic armed groups and the Myanmar military, and sometimes between the ethnic armed groups themselves, but they live in the villages, they don't have the capacity. So even if they want to get grants, they don't have any way to get that, So then you start to see the middle people getting there. But this one, the several groups I work with them, I see them the first time when I met them, they're afraid to even say their name. The woman cried because she was so nervous to even say her name, right? So how could you, get her to do complex process to get funding so that she can turn around and get, the capacity up for her community. But what I see was over time, though, toward the end, they were really, it was amazing to see their transformation. And one of the things was, we've got women from different ethnic groups, and many of them are at odds with each other. But one of the women toward the end, after like our 10th training session, she said, I just realized that we got to break through these ethnic divisions, because we are women. As long as we continue to do that, we cannot reach that tipping point. So it was really rewarding for me to see that. But also another thing I wanted to add to what everybody has said is their stories. Women's stories are not told, and even going back to World War II, so using my example again, there are women that are helping the Americans and the British, the Allied forces as pathfinders, tracking through jungles. But their stories are never told. We didn't even know until recently, right? Same thing in the United States too, that we had these women code breakers that broke codes so that we can win the war, and their stories are never told. The hidden figures, right? When we went to the moon, the women's stories, the computers behind it were women, right? They were never told. So it really reinforces the patriarchal, and then saying that women are fragile and they can't do things, So we really need to get those women's stories out as well. In Myanmar, I think, and the role model, right? In Myanmar, I think that one of the reason that a lot of women are stepping up is also Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San Suu Kyi, was a mother of the country. And it's really interesting in Myanmar context, women starting to equate being a mother as a leadership characteristics. Because there are many women up front line, they when we interview them, is that we as a future mother, these are young women still, they're not mother. We as a future mother, we are responsible to create a democracy that our children will enjoy. So that's why we have to step up and take the leadership role. So, here they're equating mother, and that's great because, many times in many society, women characteristics are not considered to be leadership characteristics, and the more women are able to attribute their women natural characteristics as leadership, then they'll be able to exercise that authentic leadership, and they'll be more effective, But just that's a little bit off track, but nevertheless, I would just say, creating more opportunity for women, but we also have to watch out, all these complex requirement for the women, and especially from those, lower socioeconomic, is very difficult for them to jump over. So we got to find a way to remove those barriers in those programs that we're delivering to these women.
Thank you very much. And I think that rounds up our panel questions. And I think just to highlight some of the interesting points for me that I really appreciated, I think Mel's point about really going beyond these neoliberal solutions as well, and to really challenging where are the money and resources going towards, really going to the material distribution. And this is something that Fatima has also mentioned, really ensuring that the bulk of the resources or significant resources go towards the community, and the women that we so openly speak about in our own professions, in our advocacies, how much of that is actually reflecting their own vernaculars, their own lived realities. And of course, Mimi's point about multidimensional solutions. We cannot just address one aspect because there are multi-issue barriers to women's leadership and participation. And again, to Carmen's fascinating point about we need to recognize and document and build that knowledge on the ways women, especially from Southeast Asia, have survived many crises even before this pandemic. They've led resistance movements. They've led typhoon reliefs. They've led peace processes. But the problem is, as Carmen pointed out, is that they get forgotten when we don't take stock of that knowledge. And therefore, in peacetime or after crises, we forget that there was enormous leadership that was always there. And so I think that for me is a very important lesson that I take away today. We now turn over to Q&A, and we've got roughly 15 minutes. I see that we've already got questions lined up, and I'll start with the ones in the chat, and then also acknowledge the hands raised from our participants. If it's okay with our panelists, I'll take maybe 2 questions and then do a round of response and then take another 2 if we've got time. Is that okay? Okay, so we'll start with a question. Sorry, yes. First is from an anonymous attendee. There are many political crises the world is facing today, and women are obviously suffering and facing security. What is the real value of UN Security Council 1325 or the Women, Peace and Security Agenda? And if at all it has been useful, what, when, and how? The second question is perhaps we could take from a hand raise from Hunter Marston. You can we can, I think, unmute you and you can ask your question directly.
Thank you, Maria, and wow, thank you to all the panelists for such a fascinating overview. I have sort of a split question for Dr. Bird and Dr. Johnston. Dr. Bird used Myanmar as a fascinating case study here. And given the sort of preoccupation of the struggle between protesters, armed groups, and the military, which the latter of which especially is dominated by men, I'm wondering how can the UN and ASEAN and other international players advocate for greater female participation in the peace process or whatever comes of the current crisis? And a related question for Dr. Johnston, I was really struck by her remarks comparing the struggle against patriarchal institutions with the broader struggle against authoritarianism in Southeast Asia. I'm wondering, are there specific examples of female-driven movements or governments that would be applicable here for Myanmar, for instance, or Southeast Asia more broadly? Success stories that you could highlight. Thank you.
Great. So those 2 questions for now. So the first on women, peace and security and its relevance, and then the directed questions to Mel and Mimi. So how do we want to go? If anyone wants to speak up straight away, Fatima, Carmen, also please feel free to jump in.
I can quickly talk about UNSC 1325. 1325 is not meant to be a crisis response type of mechanism. It is a long-term, policy related. So, but I think that it was useful to get the conversation started and, start, focusing on the issue. And then since then, 1325, there has been a series of other UNSCR, that has come along. So, 1325 may not have been able to make the dash, that far, but it gave rise to other ones. So for me, it was useful enough. It was useful enough for us. Yeah. I don't know anybody else want to chime in on the 1325.
Do Fatima or Carmen want to say anything? I'd only say that I wouldn't want to speak for women who are operationalizing 1325 in Southeast Asia, but from what I hear, it gives you some access to resource and leverage that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so it's kind of like good for building those women's movement type things.
I think in addition to that, I feel that there is less international kind of avenues to talk about women issues. So if that was not useful, then where else? So I think it's to that I feel that it in itself add value to at least to start the conversation at the highest level. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that it became a platform, a springboard to talk about peace and security. And also, I think one of the indicator is that each nation do have a national action plan on women, peace, and security. So that also was a very good indicator. However, though, if you go to the communities, they don't even know what UNSCR is all about, what NAPWPS is all about, or even women, peace, and security. So I think the trickling down of what is good in the paper vis-a-vis to the live realities of women, that's a huge gap. And I think one thing to consider are those people from the government because there was a 2019 review of the NAPWPS in the Philippines, and one of the results was that those who are focal persons that on gender and development for NAPWPS actually have very less appreciation for gender because they don't know what gender is all about. So that's a huge gap. If you have people who operationalize on NAPWPS or UNSCR for that matter, do not know anything about gender, then definitely we're doomed, right? So that's something that I think it can be an election topic for 2022 in the Philippines. We're very excited to have a new president, hopefully next year. So it's something that we can further talk about and to strengthen really what UNSCR is all about and how can that be relevant to the lives of women, because for sure it is definitely very important, but you just have to operationalize it.
Thank you. So the specific question from Hunter.
Yeah, good. At first I was very flummoxed by that question, Hunter. And then I thought about it a bit and thought, no, I can definitely answer that. So in the first case, I think most of our panelists would agree with me when I say that, authoritarianism is by its very nature patriarchal. It rests on a very patriarchal foundations, from control over, resources, militarization, strongmen culture, this very ideology especially is male-centered. In terms of where we see the success stories, in general terms, I'd say that patriarchy is the oldest political order that exists in the world. It is much older than capitalism, it's much older than these authoritarian regimes. It's well entrenched. And so we see the success of women's challenges to patriarchy in the existence of the global women's movement as a whole, as this is a relatively new phenomena and has seen the liberation of arguably more people than any other political movement in history, quite simply. So the successes have been actually quite large. Specifically in Southeast Asia, I think I will point to two aspects. The first is that as we see export-led industrialization in Southeast Asia, it's women who have manned those factories and women who have worked inside the export-led industrialization and have formed the backbone of the success of tiger economies and all sorts in Southeast Asia, and have definitely challenged both capitalism and authoritarian governments in their rollout of those kind of factories and export-led industrialization through the union movement, through various kinds of low-level organization, individual and small groups as well. So there are plenty of cases, individual cases and country-level cases there. I would say that in Southeast Asia, it's hard to talk in historical terms that specifically, but we'd see patriarchy entrenched through colonization. So it's really in that colonization period that patriarchy is really institutionalized. And for that reason, we see a lot of resistance to colonial and then neo-colonial governments from women. And so I'm thinking particularly on the one hand of the huge involvement of women in the Communist Party of Indonesia, in Garwani, the women's wing of the Communist Party, which was instrumental in pushing for all sorts of land reform, gender reform, and legal state reform, and was horribly and specifically massacred as part of the 1965 killings there and targeted. This was an authoritarian massacre predicated on patriarchal control, because it was said that Garwani had attempted to cut the penises off the generals. It was a real fight against women, that massacre. And then I'd just probably open to Carmen and say, the other challenges that we see to patriarchy that I can think of in a really big way in Timor as women's participation in the FDTL, in the Fretilin movement, in political and in the military sphere, and also in the huge number of women in the clandestinos who were actually the instrumental group in bringing down Indonesian rule in Timor. So maybe Carmen has something to say about how women challenge authoritarian governments. if she's here still.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I mean, I think women organization during the Indonesian occupation has been very strong in different ways, and that's what I said initially at the beginning, that often in time of war, in the absence of where they needed to protect the male, and in the absence of the male counterpart, they actually take the leaderships in so many fronts in order to fight against the colonialism, but also fight against the injustice and trying to protect their husbands, their sons, and their brothers. They use their body. I work with a lot of women survivors who actually use their bodies to actually tame the authoritarian systems, and then provide information to their male counterpart as to how they should actually fight. So I think there are that's why I feel that there are a lot of things that a lot of modalities that women have actually used in those sort of situations to contribute and even to lead changes in the communities against authoritarian regimes and against crisis, that we needed to take a stake talk and recognize those things so that women can actually use those things instead of go forgotten. So yeah, I think those are things that I will say.
Well, I want to just say a little bit about what Carmen said. Women bring a creativity to, to a different perspective, different way of looking at things. So it really helped the group understand the whole picture rather than half of it. So it's really important to get more women involved in these type of movement. But anyways, Hunter asked me specifically about Myanmar peace process afterwards, and if you define peace process in terms of military, yes, in the military side they only have men. They have a handful of young women, who are like some of them are medical and some of them are just administration, but that's not very many of them. So but if you zoom out and define peace process in a larger terms of whole of society, then you have a lot more women from the other side. On this side, on the people's side, this resistance side, there are definitely very capable women and very amazing women, there. So they should be part of it. And also in Myanmar society, it's a little bit over half, like I think 50.6 or 7% is women. So, if they're not represented, so we should be seeing when the peace process is, we should see 50% of the people sitting at the table should be women, because otherwise it's not a representative group. So we as the international community, as we try to facilitate that, we need to make sure that that happens, so this is the time to do it. So that that's my answer to what Hunter asked.
Great. And I'll just turn to Fatima in case you also wanted to jump in on this important topic of women and authoritarian resistance movements.
Case in point, the Philippines is basically a reflection of what we're talking about. And you have seen in the almost 6 years of his administration how the kind of response he had from the first year of his presidency in terms of the women peace facilitators or consultants on the CPP-NPA side, how brutal he was in terms of really responding to supposedly issues that have legal bearing, and yet he focuses more on the women's body, how to hurt and how to break women, how to the sexualization and the kind of language that he used definitely are barbaric, if there's any other word to it. So authoritarian response will never work, and it has never worked. Alhamdulillah, and we're very happy with that. No one can break women. We have seen the worst, and we are still seeing the worst kind. But you see women facing this kind of people and this kind of leadership, and you have seen how graceful women were and are in terms of responding to this kind of accusations coming from the government, and the kind of discourse that the government has basically said in the media are definitely women. I can say that let's just put it this way, that the authoritarian response will never work. We are still here. We still have to face it head on, because peace building have different, it's a broad spectrum, and women have different indigenous ways of fighting. And we have women rock stars all over the world, and we look up to women in their 80s and in their 90s. We celebrate them because they have good narratives that we can still look up to, and they are our package whenever we go down to communities, and whenever we see women who fight against authoritarian, highly militarized and highly securitized places. We can see how they do it, and we learn every single time. We learn to pick things up. We are very gracious, as I've said, and we're very patient. Resilience is something I have a problem with, because sometimes resilience doesn't really work that well, so we have to be very careful. But I can say that women are graceful and women are very smart. So rock on, women, definitely. And hopefully we can rock on towards the ending of the pandemic as well. Keep safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I can end on a better note than that. And so allow me again in thanking, graciously and gracefully thanking our amazing and inspiring speakers. I will now turn over to Rob York on behalf of Pacific Forum to officially close our event. Thank you again.
And thank you, Maria, and thank you to all of our esteemed panelists and participants for joining us today. It has been an important opportunity to underscore why recognizing and valuing women's leadership in Southeast Asia is crucial for developing comprehensive solutions and frameworks that address crises on multiple fronts. We hope that you will continue staying engaged with Pacific Forum programming, which you can find out more about on our website, www.pacforum.org. Please note that we have forthcoming Women, Peace, and Security research papers to be published in Pacific Forum's journal, Issues and Insights, so stay tuned for those. I'd also like to remind you of the post-event survey, which will automatically open upon the conclusion of this webinar. We would really appreciate if you would take a few minutes to complete it and share your feedback. You can find a link to that in the chat window now. Thank you to our speakers again for joining us today, and to our partners in Indo-Pacific Command for making this event possible. We hope to see you at our future events. Stay safe and be well.